Welcome, my name is Jeff Bartels. I'm an infrastructure technical specialist here at Autodesk, and I am joined today by my colleagues Dana Judge and Jerry Bartels, who is now back from vacation. This is our 10th installment, I believe, of the 30-minute workout series. Today we're going to be looking at how we can take advantage of AutoCAD's annotative properties to create annotations within Civil 3D. If you're unfamiliar with the 30-minute workout concept, I'm sure you'll agree if you've ever taken a Civil 3D training course before, you know there's never enough time to talk about all of the features that application has. Civil 3D is built on top of AutoCAD, it's built on top of MAP, and it includes a ton of functionality in its own right. So there's never enough time during a typical class to cover all of that information. Usually classes are focused on the need-to-know functionality. What do you need to know in order to do your job? Those remaining features and workflows are the type of things that you just pick up over a lifetime using the application. So we put together these 30-minute workouts as a way to demonstrate and walk through some of those lesser talked about tools to provide a resource to fill in some gaps and provide more value for those who have made an investment in Autodesk applications. A couple of ground rules. Many of the examples that we show are of an abstract nature, and we do that on purpose so that we can focus solely on the function of the tool itself. Once you understand how a tool works, you can then apply it in whatever situation works best for you. These sessions are only 30 minutes long. We hope by making it 30 minutes, it makes it easy for you to get in and get out and get on with your day. Since we're only together for 30 minutes, our goal is to always start on time and end on time because we value your time. These sessions are recorded, so if you have registered for this session, you will get a follow-up that contains a download of the session, so you can have the video stored locally on your server. If you have questions during the session, go ahead and put those into the Q&A pane. Dana and Jerry will be chasing those down as we go. In the event there are any questions that we don't get to during the session, we will follow up with you, so you will get your questions answered. One more thing, if you would like to have a one-on-one follow-up call with one of us, please put that in the Q&A pane too. We always appreciate talking to other users. Our agenda for today, we are going to introduce AutoCAD's annotative property in the event you haven't had a chance to explore that feature before. We'll kind of get into that from an introductory level. We'll talk about the various objects that can be annotative. We'll look at how we can create and edit annotative objects. We'll also talk about when may be a good idea to use an annotative object as opposed to a traditional Civil 3D label. Since we're talking about the annotative property, we'll look at some settings that control it, and then I've got bonus content on there. If we get to everything that I wanted to talk about today, there's always things to talk about. In the event we don't get to it, we can just push that forward to another session. As always, this is going to be a PowerPoint-free zone. We are going to be working live in the application for the duration of our time together today. All right, now that our housekeeping is taken care of, I'm going to jump over to Civil 3D, and I'm going to try and find a good place to hide a interface item here on screen. In the interest of full disclosure, let me mention that I'm working in Civil 3D 2021.1. Having said that, everything that I show you today will work regardless of the version of Civil 3D that you may be using. On screen, I have some geometry that represents a single-family home. We'll say that this geometry was picked up via survey, so this is just line work. In fact, if I hover, I think these are polylines. Although they don't have to be polylines, they could be feature lines or survey figures or something like that. I would like to label this house as single-family home. Typically, when we create a label in Civil 3D, that label is tied to data. In this case, I don't have any data. I just want to create a text string to put a label on this. To create generic labels in Civil 3D, we do that by going to the Annotate tab, and in the Labels and Tables panel, I'm going to expand Add Labels, and I'll choose Notes. We label these generic objects with a note. And I've got several note styles in here. I'm just going to select this one called General Notes, and I'll click Add, and then I will click to place it on screen. Once the label's been added, I can then select this. I can go to Edit Label Text, and then I can edit this to read whatever I need. There we go. Once I put my label on there, we'll close this. The labels in Civil 3D are fantastic in that they will automatically scale if the scale of our drawing changes. You can see as fast as I change this, the size of that label updates. I'm going to flip this to 1 inch equals 30 feet. When the drawing scale is set to 1 inch equals 30 feet, this label is now appropriately sized for a 1 inch equals 30 foot viewport. Let's test that. I'm going to jump out to a layout, and then here on the Layout tab, I'm going to create a rectangular viewport. We'll pull this out, and then I will select the viewport and we'll set this to 1 inch equals 30 feet. I'll do a quick regen all to clean that up. And then I'm going to create a copy of this viewport. I'm horribly old-fashioned. I just typed that in. And I'll drag this over. I will then select this viewport and we'll set this one to 1 inch equals 60 feet. And I'll do another regen. And we'll zoom in. You can see that Civil 3D is doing exactly what it's supposed to. This label is showing up in each view at the appropriate size. However, in the 60 scale view, this text is a little bit big and it's not centered in there very well. Let me double click in this view and I will select the label. If I click the grip, I can kind of move this around, but as I move things, you can see that as I move the one, while I could be maybe making the one view look better, I could be making the other view look worse. Likewise, maybe I'd like to rotate the 60 scale version independently, and I just can't do that. I can't do what I want here using a Civil 3D label. Since this label is not tied to data, it's simply a text string that I typed in, maybe an AutoCAD Annotative object may be a better choice. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to go to Model, and I'm going to select this label and we'll delete it. The annotative property in AutoCAD was introduced in 2008, so it's been around for a while. It applies to multiple objects. We're going to look at text first. Here on the Annotate ribbon tab in the Text panel, I'm going to open up the Text Style dialog box. From here, you can see the text styles that are in this drawing. You can see the ones that are annotative with the icon next to them. To make a text style annotative, all we have to do is click this toggle. I'm going to turn it off for just a second. And if we come over here, we can see a height property. This is the height I'd like my text to be. Notice that when I turn this on, this changes to paper text height. What this means is the dimensional values or the heights that I put in here represent the height I want this text to appear on the printed sheet. That actually makes it very easy to create annotations. I'm going to cancel out. I haven't made any changes. If we look at the top of the screen, we can see my text style is current and it's annotative. If I create a label using this text style, it will look right here to determine the size, such that when printed, it'll be 0.1 tall. To create that text, I'm just going to use the mtext command, and then I will type single family house. I will then select this text, and I'd like it to be centered. I'd like this justification to be middle centered. That looks good. If I hover over this label, notice that icon. That shows me that the label is annotative, and it is annotative to the scale. Let's jump out to our layout and take a look. Notice where the label shows up. Notice where it doesn't show up. Why doesn't it show up in the 1 to 60 viewport? Because it's not intended to show up in that viewport. It is designed to show up at 1 to 30. So already this is doing something that I can't easily do with a Civil 3D label without manipulating some layers. Let's say I'd like this label to show up at 1 to 60. I'm going to go back to Model. The way I can do that is by simply adding that scale to this annotation. One way I can do that is by selecting the annotation, and I can go to the Properties palette. Right here I can see it's an annotative object, and I can see the scale. Using this dialog box, I can click Add, and I can select a new scale. Note that I can also use this dialog box to delete scales if I want to. When I click OK, this annotation now supports 2 scales. If I hover over it now, you can see the icon has changed. I can see multiple icons. That shows me it supports multiple scales. Currently, it is sized for the 30 scale view. If I select it, though, we'll see the 60 scale size here as well. It's kind of ghosted in the background. Let's go back out to our layout. Notice where the label shows up now. Shows up in both views. Here's where it gets interesting. If I double-click in the 1 to 60 view and I select this annotation, notice that I can move this version independently of the other version. Can't do that with a Civil 3D label. In addition to just being able to move it, I could rotate it. I could select this and I could come over to the Properties palette and I could change its rotation to 25. Let's click the grip and I will position this a little bit closer. There we go. So I have one label that's displaying in 2 views, appropriately sized, and I have independent control over the location and the rotation. And this is one label. I can come in here, we'll double click to edit it here. And I can do this in either view, or I could do it in model space. We could say 2-story house. You can see it's the same label in both cases. So for this particular application, maybe the AutoCAD annotation would be a little bit more valuable than the Civil 3D one. I should also mention that these annotative objects are supported through an external reference, just like the Civil 3D labels are. Let's take this to another level. Maybe I would like to create a leader. I'd like to identify that this sidewalk is concrete. Now, I don't have any Civil 3D data that I can tie to. I just want to create a label that says concrete. For that reason, maybe an AutoCAD annotation might be a wise choice. In AutoCAD, our multi-leaders can be annotative. Here in the Leaders panel, I'm going to click to bring up the Multi-Leader Style Manager. From here, we can see the multi-leader styles that are in this drawing. I can see the ones that are annotative. If you'd like to create an annotative multi-leader style, if you visit the Leader Structure tab, you'll find that same annotative toggle here. So if I turn this on, every one of these sizes, every one of these dimensional settings applies to how I want this leader to be sized on the printed page. So it's the same as with the text. Let me close onto this. I just want to show you that my current multi-leader style is annotative. Let's go ahead and put a label on this. When I create the label, it is going to be sized for the 30 scale view. Let's go to multi-leader, and I'm going to place this nearest to here. We'll call this concrete. If I hover, we can see that that's an annotative object, and it is annotative to the current scale. Let's go back to layout. Notice where it shows up. Notice where it doesn't show up. If I want that label to show up in this viewport, I'm going to do the same thing. All I have to do is add that scale to this object. Now, we've already seen that I can add and remove scales by selecting the annotation, and I can come over to Properties, and I can do it here. So that's one place I can do it. Let's look at another option. I want this to be suitable for a 1 inch equals 60 foot viewport. If I come down and open the scale list and set this to 1 inch equals 60, here in the Annotate ribbon tab, I can come up and click Add Current Scale. When I click Add Current Scale, it says, okay, add current scale to what? I can select this object or multiple objects, or I could type all if I want to add that scale to all the objects. Let me press Enter. And we can see this one now supports 60 scale. I'm going to go back to my Layout tab. Here we can see it in both views. Let's double click. Just like with text, I have independent control over the location of these leaders. That's something I can't do with a Civil 3D label. One more thing. Let's go back to Model. Since this is a multi-leader, if I select the object, I have the ability to add or remove leaders. Once again, something I can't do with a Civil 3D label style. Let's go back to Layout. And we can see that in both views. Let's go back to Model Space, and we'll talk about some helpful settings. If I select an annotation that supports multiple scales, we can see kind of like the ghosted version there. If you have an annotation that supports multiple scales, like maybe 5 or 6 scales, when you select it, it could get a little bit busy on screen, seeing all of those variations. I don't have to see all the variations. There is a system variable called Selection Anno Display. If I choose that, we can see the default value is set to 1, meaning it's turned on. It's going to display all of the sizes. If I set that to 0, if I click an object now, you can see that it doesn't show me all of those extra versions. This is how I typically work in a production environment. Let's put things back the way they were. I'm going to right-click, and from the menu, I'll choose Repeat Selection Anno Display. I'll set that back to 1 and press Enter. Another thing, if you independently adjust the multiple scales of your annotation, there may come a time where you'd like to bring them all back together again. If I select the label, now I happen to select the current one, which is 1 to 60. You can see that's got multiple variations there. If I'd like to bring these together, I can select the one that I want, and then I will come up, and in the ribbon I'll choose Sync Scale Positions. The command is actually Anno Reset. If I select that, what it did was it pulled all the variations up to match the location of the current one. Now, if I wanted to independently move these here in Model Space, I did it through the Viewport before, but let's say I'd like to move that 30 scale one down. If I just change this to 30, there's the 30 scale variation. I can click. Even though I see that ghosted version there, the grips apply to the current one. And we've seen how we can turn off that ghosted version if we want to. Let's talk for a second about this icon. It says Show Annotation Objects Always. What this does is it allows your annotations to display regardless of the scale that we're using in model space. We've seen that these annotations support 30 scale. What if I flip this to 20? They still display, even though they don't support that scale. If I toggle this button off, then model space is going to work just like those viewports. It will only show the annotations that support the scale that I've selected. So I can set this to 60. Let's go ahead and turn this back on again. So we can do that. Next, I want to show you one of the most dangerous buttons in the interface. We can argue over which one might be the most dangerous, but this one would certainly rank up there. Add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes. Currently, this is turned off. What does this do? Well, let's say right now these annotations support 30 scale and they support 60. Maybe I'd like them all, maybe I've got a bunch of them in here, and I'd like them all to support another scale. We've seen some ways to add scales to objects. The fastest way to do it, let's say I want to make all of these suitable for a viewport that's 1 inch equals 5 feet, just for the sake of argument. A really fast way to assign those scales is to come down and turn this on, and then when I make the scale adjustment here, it will automatically assign my selected scale to all of my annotations. Now, why is this dangerous? Because people forget to turn it off. If you forget to turn that off, each time you go through and select a scale in this list, if your annotations don't support that scale already, they will. And then you may have 6, 7, 8 versions there that you don't need. So if you use this tool, turn it off when you're finished. Having said that, I've got annotations here that now support 1 inch equals 5 feet, and I don't need that. So how can I remove those scales? I'm going to choose the scale that I no longer want. And if I come up to the annotation scaling panel, notice there's an option here called Delete Current Scale. It says Delete Current Scale from what? I will type all and press Enter a couple times to remove those scales. Okay, let's go back to the layout. And I'm going to select both of these viewports, and I'm going to place these on a layer that is turned off, just to hide those from screen. Let's create a new viewport. Maybe I would like to create a detail of this stairs area. I'm going to create that as a circle, just to mix things up here a little bit. And then I will go to the Layout tab, and I would like to create a viewport from an object. I'll choose Object and select this. And then I will select that viewport, and let's set the scale of this to 1 inch equals 10 feet. I'll double-click to jump in there, and then I'll kind of center this on screen. Notice what we see in that view. Notice what we don't see. We don't see any of these annotations. Why? Because they don't support 1 inch equals 10 feet. Maybe for this detail, I'd like to add some dimensions. Dimensions support the annotative property. I'm going to jump to model space. Here in my dimensions panel, I can see my current dimension style, Autodesk, and I can see it's annotative based on the icon. If I bring up the dimension style dialog box, we can see the dimension styles in this drawing, and we can easily tell which ones are annotative. If you would like to create an annotative dimension style, in the dialog box, if you go to the Fit tab, you'll find that same annotative toggle right here. If I turn that on, any of the dimensional items, any of the sizes that I assign here, are the sizes that I want these dimensions to appear on the printed sheet. Works the same as the text and the multi-leaders. Let me hit cancel. I'll close out of this. So I'm going to be dimensioning this drawing using my current dimension style, which is annotative. Let's zoom in. If I create my dimensions right now, it's going to look right down here, and they're going to be suitable for 1 inch equals 5 feet. That's not what I want. I want these for the 1 inch equals 10 foot viewport. Once I set that, I'm just going to create a couple of linear dimensions. Let me turn my running object snaps on. We'll create one here. I'll just hit my space bar to go right back into that command, and we'll pull out another one. And then I'll create another one here. These dimensions are annotative. They're annotative to 1 scale currently. If I jump to my layout, notice where those dimensions show, notice where they don't show. Just for a second, I just want you to realize everything I've been creating so far is on one layer. Okay? Not how you would typically work, but notice how the annotative property kind of makes some of these things layer independent. Let's talk about another annotative possibility here in the Civil 3D platform using AutoCAD. Hatch can be annotative. Maybe I'd like to hatch this porch area. I'm going to go to the Home tab, and if I launch the Hatch command, Hatch also includes an annotative toggle. If I turn this on, the hatch that I create will be appropriately sized or annotative to the scale, 1 inch equals 10 feet. So I'd like to hatch the porch here. I'm going to use this ANSI 36. It's going to have kind of a light yellow background with gray line work. That looks good, and then I can kind of dial down the scale here just to tighten up those lines a little bit. Once I get that the way I like it, I can say close. If I hover over this hatch, you can see that annotative icon. So it is suitable for 1 inch equals 10 feet. If we go to the layout, notice where that hatch shows up. Notice where it doesn't show up. If I'd like this hatch to show up in another viewport, all I have to do is add the scale to that hatch pattern. Let's go to Model Space. I will select my hatch, and we've seen a few ways to do this. I'm going to do it from the Properties palette again. I'll come over here and I will click the Annotative Scale. We'll say Add, and I'm going to add 30 scale to this. So now it supports 2 scales. Immediately after doing that, I'm going to go to the Layout tab, and you can see that hatch shows up in both views, and it is sized the same regardless of the scale of the viewport. So if you've ever hatched things before and you have a legend that represents what all your hatch patterns are, sometimes that legend has to be scale dependent because as your geometry gets larger or farther away, hatch patterns look larger or smaller. Using Annotative Hatch, the hatch will always be appropriately sized regardless of the viewport where it's placed. And all of these items, they're honored through an external reference. Fantastic. We're just shy of 5 minutes here to the top of the hour. Let's look at some bonus content. And this might be a little controversial, okay? I'm going to create a copy of this viewport. Let's copy this over. Now, what scale does this viewport have? Well, same one as the other. If I select it, I can see it's 1 inch equals 10 feet. What if I'd like to create a custom scale? If I open the menu, I can see the scale that's being used. I'm going to come down and choose Custom. I used to think that the annotative objects, their display was controlled by the scale of the viewport. It's not. The display of these objects is controlled by the name that's assigned to the scale of the viewport. Let me show you what I mean. If I choose 1 to 10, that's the current scale, and I choose Edit, we can see there's the name of that scale, and then down here we can see the scale factor, 1 inch equals 10 feet. Let's click Cancel. Maybe I'd like to create a new scale. I'll click Add, and then I'm going to call this 1 inch equals 10 feet special. And I'm going to set this to the same scale, 1 inch equals 10. I will then click OK. What happens if I assign this new scale to my viewport? Notice that all of my annotations disappear. Even though these are the same scale, the annotative objects are looking at the name of that scale. I show you that just so that you're aware of it. I noticed this first when I was working in production because I had scale factors that were 1 inch equals 30 feet, but then I had a drawing where the scale factor was 1 inch equals 30 feet, like that. And I was wondering why my annotative objects coming from an external reference weren't displaying like they were supposed to. It's because it was looking at the name and not at the scale factor. Knowing that, could we take advantage of this? We could. If I go to Model Space, maybe I could select the objects that I'd like to appear in that special viewport. I am going to choose 1 inch equals 10 special, and then we'll go to the Annotate tab, and I'm going to choose Add Current Scale. Maybe I would like this object, maybe I would like these 2 dimensions, and I'd like this object to display in that viewport. When I press Enter, I can see those are supported. Let me click this one, and I'm going to pull it up. Maybe we'll put it here. I can click this call out, and I can pull this over. This is one of the things I really like about the independent control over these call outs. I can even move the arrowheads if I want to. When I jump back out to my layout, same label, same call out being displayed at the appropriate size in 3 different viewports with full independent control. If I was to get in here and change this text, maybe I just want CONC period. You can see it's the same label in all cases. Here I've got the same label appearing at the appropriate size in multiple viewports, independent location and rotation. Here I've got hatch. that's displaying in multiple viewports at the appropriate size regardless of the scale. And then here I've got 2 viewports at the same scale, and I'm still able to use the annotative property to control their display. Do you want to build your empire on this? Maybe not. Maybe not, but I show it to you just so that you're aware of what the annotative objects are looking at. They're looking at the name and not the scale factor. With that, I'm going to jump back over to my PowerPoint slides here. Today, we talked about the AutoCAD Annotative property. In the event you haven't seen it before, I strongly encourage you to get in and explore that a little bit. We talked about the objects that can be annotative. That's text, multi-line text, MultiLeaders, dimensions, hatch, and blocks support that annotative property. So if you're wanting to explore something else, that's another good thing to look at. We looked at how we could create annotative objects and then edit them. Independent control, we could take and assign viewports for them so that they know which viewports to display in. When to use annotative objects. Let me say this up front. I'm not encouraging you to use annotative objects for every label. If you're creating a label, ask yourself, can I tie the text in this label to Civil 3D data? If you can, then use a Civil 3D label. That's the way to go. If you're creating a label that's just going to be a text string that you type in, now you've seen 2 ways you can do it. You can do it with Civil 3D, or you can use an AutoCAD annotative object. You can make the decision for yourself which one is best for you. We talked about some helpful settings today. We looked at how we could reset the label location. We looked at how we could turn off those ghosted settings if we want to. We also looked at the most dangerous button in the interface, so be careful with that one if you do use that. Make sure and turn it off when you're done. And then for the bonus content, which we don't get a chance to get to very often, we did see how the annotative objects, we can control their display within viewports even if they have the same scale. All right, I am going to check with Jerry and Dana now and see if they jump in and just identify if there are any questions that have gone unanswered at this point.
And that's it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate your time. Everybody's going to be getting a follow-up with a link where they can download the video from today's session. If you have any feedback, our email information is going to be on there, so we appreciate feedback, good or bad, because we want to make sure that the content that we provide to you is something that can be of value. On behalf of Dana and Jerry, I just want to say thank you again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you guys again in a couple of weeks. See ya.